In the previous episode, Lu Sheng successfully saved his waifu number 1, made an even bigger name for himself, and well, let's be real here. The real W here is to see the two of them finally making some serious progress in their relationship. Now let's get back to the story. When he walked into the wardrobe, he casually asked the maid, "How old is that guy again?" The maid replied that he was still pretty young, in his 70s. Lu Sheng was slightly caught off guard. Sure, martial artists usually had long lifespans, and well, a 70-year-old dude could still be considered young, but still, this guy was her parents' old comrade. Awkward much? Rather than dwell on it, Lu Sheng asked the maid what she thought. Her answer was straightforward, saying she'd already turned him down a bunch of times. Besides, she's not planning on getting married and she just wants to stay by Lu Sheng's side, serving him for the rest of her life. Lu Sheng slipped on the coat she handed him and shook his head. He didn't think it was necessary for her to sacrifice so much. He tells her that if she ever meets someone she likes, she should go for it. No need to hang around him forever, adding with a smile, especially since he might not even stay in the Eastern Military District too long. He glanced at himself in the mirror, adjusting his coat, saying he's heading out now. Before leaving, he gave her a knowing glance, telling her that she was still young and she had a whole future ahead of her. The maid nodded respectfully. "I understand." Lu Sheng knew everyone had their own secrets. Sure, the maid was lying about something, but as long as it didn't affect him, he wasn't going to pry. Not long after, Lu Sheng arrived at the fanciest restaurant in the Eastern Military District, the famous Blue Dove restaurant. It was the same place Snowy had booked last time, but he stood her up. As he checked his reflection in the glass, he figured, this counted as a proper date. He'd better put on his best behavior. Soon enough, he heard footsteps behind him, and he knew exactly who it was. He turned around. Even though he was mentally prepared, he still froze when he saw Snowy. Wait, is she wearing a dress? Lu Sheng was absolutely stunned. Snowy, out of her military uniform and dressed like a woman for once. Calling her stunning doesn't even do her justice. She's beyond stunning. Noticing his expression, Snowy blushed, but there was more excitement than embarrassment in her eyes. "Surprised?" she asked with a shy smile. Lu Sheng shook his head, his tone filled with obvious admiration, saying, "Not really surprised, just blown away." Who knows where Lu Sheng had picked up these smooth lines? He definitely wasn't this good at talking to girls before. Snowy, though still blushing, did her best to act natural, quickly changing the subject, saying it's time to eat, trying to steer the conversation away from the compliments. Lu Sheng smiled and nodded. Then, out of nowhere, he held out his hand. She froze, clearly not expecting him to be so straightforward today. Snowy bit her lip for a second, then placed her hand in his. They walked a few steps together, side by side. On the surface, everything seemed calm, but if I had to guess, both their heart rates had probably skyrocketed to over 200. Lu Sheng, with his sharp senses, could tell just how nervous and flustered Snowy was trying to act cool. Oddly enough, he found it kinda cute. Once they sat down, the waiter came over to take their order. Naturally, Lu Sheng ordered pretty much everything on the menu. He didn't forget the drinks and desserts either. It wasn't long before the table was packed with food. If this had been the old Lu Sheng, he probably would have just grabbed a whole plate and started inhaling it. His hand instinctively reached for the steak, but he stopped mid-grab. Quickly pulling his hand back, he coughed and reminded himself, first date. Gotta act civilized. So as much as it pained him, he tried to be proper, cutting the steak into small pieces with a knife, before delicately lifting them with a fork. Across from him, Snowy took a bite, and immediately burned her tongue on the hot beef. Lu Sheng couldn't help but chuckle a little at the sight. Both of them ate quickly, and before long the food was gone. They devoured the entire table. And what's the next stop? Well, according to the plan, it's time for a movie. Back at Lu Sheng's villa, two maids were trimming the grass, gossiping in hushed tones. "I still can't believe it," one whispered. "Who would have thought the Lord Lu would get himself a girlfriend? I mean, Snowy? That girl was like an iceberg?" They exchanged a few more snide comments, things that definitely shouldn't be said aloud, but they didn't stay secret for long. The head maid overheard them. "If I catch either of you gossiping about Lord Lu behind his back again," she snapped, "I'll personally escort you both to the military district prison." The two maids froze. Without another word, they bowed their heads and scurried away like mice, disappearing as fast as they could. The head maid watched them go, then turned her gaze toward a distant spot, and then she let out a sigh. She followed the faint trail of cigarette smoke until she stopped just outside the villa walls. There stood a man, casually leaning against the wall. She asked what was the man doing here. The man flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his boot. Didn't answer, but rather asked, when is she going to make her move? Although didn't mention any names, the man mentioned that someone was getting quite impatient. She frowned and then tells the man that this was the Eastern Military District, and Lu Sheng's their golden boy, their rising star, whatever you want to call him. So, how is she supposed to take him out? She believed that the moment she made a move, she wouldn't make it 2 steps before they put her down. The man crossed his arms, looking a bit anxious, saying Lu Sheng's power was growing too fast. He's not even 20 yet, and give him a few more years. Not even the venom of a level 9 beast will be able to kill him. The maid turned her back to him, a sly smile creeping across her face, telling the man to relax, saying the military competition is in a few days. She's sure Lu Sheng will represent the Eastern District. That'll be her chance. She plans to take action when he's distracted, and it'll make her escape easier. The man looked much more satisfied, hearing the maid already had a plan. He tells her that once it's done, if she's looking for strength or pursuing a martial path, he will arrange for her to join the Jidao martial school, putting her on the level of a martial saint's disciple. If it's money that she wants, she will be drowning in it. Then, with a smirk, the man pulled out another cigarette, lighting it with a flick of his match. His eyes roamed over her body, and of course, if she wants something else, well, that can be arranged too. The head maid waved the smoke away in disgust, wrinkling her nose. She clearly hated the smell and didn't bother hiding it. "Don't come here again," she said sharply. The last thing she needs is Lu Sheng getting suspicious. She didn't bother to say anything more. With a sharp turn, she walked off. "Pah! Just another snake," the man muttered under his breath, spitting on the ground as he watched her figure disappear into the distance, his face twisted with contempt. She thinks betraying her master will end well for her? He snorted as he quickly vanished into a portal. Well, let's be honest here. For a villain, he sure didn't have much sense. Smoking around Lu Sheng's villa and leaving traces behind? Not the brightest move. Anyway, let's get back to the story. Meanwhile, under the calm glow of the moon, 2 figures strolled side by side in comfortable silence. The only sounds were their footsteps on the quiet street. Neither of them spoke, but both seemed to enjoy the peaceful moment together. Snowy, however, kept sneaking glances at Lu Sheng's face, trying not to get caught. Finally, they reached her home. Lu Sheng blinked, a hint of reluctance on his face. Well, it's time that he stops here. Looking a little disappointed, he tells her he will watch her go up. With her head lowered, Snowy hesitated for a second, then finally spoke. In a few days, it'll be the Eastern Military District's competition. Lu Sheng already had a feeling he knew what she wanted to say. Of course, he will do his best to not seriously hurt Dong Shengyi, but he also made it very clear that some things once wrong are just wrong, and people need to pay for their mistakes. Since he already said he will break his martial path, then he will put his money where his mouth is. Honestly, that guy would never make it to the 9th level anyway. Lu Sheng figured he might as well crush his hopes early. Hearing Lu Sheng's tone, Snowy sighed softly, telling him if he made up his mind, then go ahead. Suddenly, without warning, she threw her arms around Lu Sheng, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll always be on your side." Before he could react, she quickly let go and rushed toward her door, disappearing inside. Lu Sheng stood there, staring at the spot where she'd just been, replaying her words in his head. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. But wait, wasn't something missing? Ah, right, he forgot to kiss her. The realization hit him all at once, and he mentally kicked himself for missing the perfect opportunity. Next time, he will definitely be more proactive, he thought with a determined smile. As soon as she got home, Snowy kicked off her high heels, sending them flying to the side, and collapsed onto her bed. She replayed bits of the date in her mind, her face occasionally flushing with a mix of embarrassment and excitement. Feeling a bit restless, she grabbed her phone and started searching for something specific. What should a girl do on a second date? It was like opening a door to a whole new world. The more she scrolled, the more red her face got. There's so much to think about. Who knew second dates had so many unwritten rules? Still, she spends the entire night reading all about them. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Lu Sheng had just returned to his villa, but instead of resting, he entered the dream realm. Connecting the legendary bridges was proving to be way harder than he'd expected. The theory sounded simple enough. Break through the limits of body and mind, merge with the natural energies of the world, and undergo a deeper transformation. Lu Sheng closed his eyes, calming his mind as he recalled the words. The heaven bridge gathers above the head, the earth bridge surges from the soles of the feet. Not long after, a powerful surge of energy exploded from his body, shooting straight into the sky. The energy swirled and morphed into birds, flying in graceful circles around him. The sensation was incredible. He realized he had entered the third layer of the void state. His psychic power had just made a breakthrough. Could it be? Had he connected the heaven and earth bridges, triggering a new level of understanding? After all, his psychic power had been stagnant for quite some time. This new breakthrough meant that, even without relying on the dream realm's inherited memories, he could push his martial arts mastery to the next level. Perhaps soon he would reach the domain realm, and his perfect martial path would ascend even further. The last time Lu Sheng had checked his personal info, he had reached martial saint status, but he had yet to grasp the third layer of the void state. That lack of mastery had ultimately been his downfall, preventing him from breaking through to the 10th level. But now, everything was different. He was on the verge of reaching heights he hadn't imagined before. Right now, Lu Sheng could feel it. All his powers had evolved in multiple ways, particularly his control over the elements. The sensation of connecting the heaven and earth bridges was incredible, and more than that, it was downright powerful. If he could maintain this state, he'd passively absorb the world's energy. He estimated that in half a month, he'd be able to create one immortal cell. In a month, that'd be 2, and in a year, 24. At that rate, he didn't even need 5 years. He'd reach 100 immortal cells. Thinking about it, Lu Sheng stretched out his hand and made a fist in the air, creating a faint sound of a sonic boom echoing. By that point, he knew, crushing a martial saint would be as easy as squeezing a tomato. The scene shifted back to the Eastern Military District, where peace had finally returned after the chaos of the double S-level cavern uprising. While the other caverns have also quieted down, it seemed like the district had entered a rare period of calm. With many general stars returning from the cavern, preparations for a grand event were already in motion. The highly anticipated military competition. Back at our boys' place, it seemed like there wasn't much suspense about this year's competition. Unlike previous years, there was a clear favorite this time. Lu Sheng's emergence had completely overshadowed everyone else. For many, it felt like the outcome was already set in stone. Meanwhile, the maid was cleaning the table, her mind wandering, filled with thoughts of Lu Sheng. She didn't snap back to reality until she noticed him descending the stairs. Straightening up, she respectfully informed him, "The military district competition is about to start, sir. The military vehicle has arrived to take you there." Lu Sheng nodded slightly and continued on his way. The maid instinctively glanced up at Lu Sheng, only to find his eyes already on her. In that instant, she felt completely exposed, as if he could see right through her, inside and out. A wave of fear, or maybe guilt, washed over her, and before she knew it, her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor. Lu Sheng, however, remained calm, asking her, "What's wrong?" However, struggling to find her voice, the maid stammered, It's just that your presence is so overwhelming." To be fair, she wasn't lying. Lu Sheng's aura was intense, almost suffocating. But even she didn't fully understand why a single look from him had sent her into such a panic. Her entire body was still trembling, unable to shake off the feeling. Without another word, Lu Sheng simply asked her to bring him his military uniform. The maid hurriedly scrambled to her feet and ran off, her heart pounding in her chest. As he watched her leave, he thought to himself that ever since he had crossed into the third layer of the void state, his mental clarity had been operating hundreds of times faster than the average person's. Every tiny expression, every subtle movement, nothing escaped his notice. And the maid? Well, her every action and expression had been telling one clear message. She was anxious, or maybe guilty. And when do people feel guilty? Naturally, when they've done something wrong or are about to. That reminded him of the so-called old comrade of her parents. It didn't take long for Lu Sheng to put 2 and 2 together. He decided to have the butler discreetly investigate the situation. As for the rest, he didn't dwell on it too much. He already had a pretty good idea of what was happening. After all, a plot that's been exposed isn't really a plot anymore. It's just handing yourself over on a silver platter. Hey guys, I know some of you have been asking about the Necromancer update this week. In case you missed the pinned comment on the last episode, Only one chapter was released last week. So, we'll be rolling it into this week's episode on the weekend. Huge thanks to the recent super chats and channel members for your support. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.